we are going to continue to discuss demand. Today, what we're going to think about are changes in demand. So this right here is something like we saw last class, where we looked at demand for gasoline in the United States. And I told you that when the price of gasoline was $2.96, there were 24 million gallons of gasoline per day demanded. And it's been estimated that if the price decreases 15 cents, quantity will increase by 31 million gallons. And law of demand says this is what we'd expect, right? The price of gasoline goes down, so people will decide to drive a little bit more. So we see an increase in gasoline consumption. So what is that? That means we're just moving from one point on our graph to another, right? That's what a demand graph does. It tells us for different prices, what are the different quantities of gasoline that we will consume. Let me pull the law of demand up here once again. The law of demand is a principle in economics which states that as the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded will decrease, all else held constant. Now we're going to focus on these last four words here, all else held constant. What does that mean? Or what does it specifically mean when we stop holding things constant? So here's our graph of the demand for gasoline. The demand curve shows how quantity purchased changes when price changes, all else equal, all else held constant. So again, that's what the demand curve is for. It's just for showing us how quantity changes when price changes. If quantity purchase changes due to anything other than a price change, then the demand curve itself will move. So change in price is movement along the curve. That's movement from one point on the curve to another point on the curve. A change in something else means the entire demand curve will move. So suppose Oprah decides to just give everyone a Tesla, reducing the use of gasoline-fueled cars. This reduces gasoline used at every price. So if the price is $2 a gallon or $3 a gallon, whatever the price is, we're definitely going to be using less gasoline than we were before. What this means is that the demand curve itself is going to move. We call this a change in demand. So when the price goes down and we buy more, that's a change in quantity demanded. When the entire demand curve moves, that is a change in demand. And notice why it is that we think of this as a change in demand, or why we think this will happen. Well, if we think about any point, so we'll take the point where gasoline costs about $2.50 a gallon. So initially, if gasoline costs $2.50 a gallon, we would get about this quantity used. Once Oprah gives everyone a Tesla, we're at the new demand curve. This is the amount that gets used. So notice we go from about 24.6 million gallons a day to 23.6 million gallons per day. And why did that big decrease come about? Because now we're all driving Teslas. We don't need gasoline anymore. So even if the price doesn't change, we are going to find ourselves purchasing less gasoline. If consumers' willingness to pay at every possible price changes, that is a shift in demand. Another example, if more people decide to become vegetarians, there will be a shift in the demand for lettuce. If a storm destroys the lettuce crop leading to a price increase, that will be movement along the demand curve. Because in the second one, there's no change in how much people like lettuce. I still like lettuce as much as I did yesterday. I'm still willing to pay as much for it. The only difference is that the price went up, and as a result, I'm eating less of it. Whereas for this one right here, where people become vegetarians, essentially my preferences for lettuce have changed. I now like lettuce more than I used to because I'm eating it instead of steak. So let's put what we've learned together. We're going to compare an increase in quantity demanded to an increase in demand. So first we'll look at an increase in quantity demanded. We have an increase in quantity demanded. We are going to have movement down and to the right on the demand curve. So we move down and to the right. What's going on here? Well, we're seeing a decrease in price, right? Price goes from P1 down to P2. And as a result, we move down our demand curve and our quantity increases from Q1 to Q2. This is just standard what we expect to happen when price goes down. Price goes down, we consume more. Now let's compare this with an increase in demand. So that's going to be where the whole demand curve shifts. So when we have an increase in demand, we get an outward shift of the demand curve. So we started off at D1. We start off right here. So we have our price here. Our initial demand curve, we're going to consume Q1 units. Then something happens to our demand. So again, maybe this is the demand for lettuce and we all become vegetarians. Well, what happens then is we now move to a new demand curve, D2. We shift to the right. We also sometimes call that an outward shift. And the result is that we are now consuming Q2. We're consuming more units than we were before. That is an increase in demand. We have an outward shift of the demand curve. Next, we'll think about a decrease in quantity demanded versus a decrease in demand. So first thing we'll look at is a decrease in quantity demanded. That's when we have movement up and to the left on the demand curve. So again, this is something that we've seen when we learned about the law of demand. So when price goes up, we're going to see a reduction in quantity demanded because this is just how we expect people to respond to an increase in price. Price goes up, you consume less. We move up and to the left on the demand curve. We can compare that with a decrease in demand. So a decrease in demand occurs when we have an inward or leftward shift of the demand curve. So initially we were at D1 consuming this many units. Then the whole demand curve shifts from D1 to D2. So this is something where it's my demand for steak and now I become a vegetarian. And what happens is now when the demand shifts, now I'm only consuming Q2 units. So again, price stayed the same. Even holding price constant, I am still consuming less steak. So that's why it is a change in demand. Suppose you are watching the nightly news and you hear a reporter say this. In the wake of Hurricane Dorian, gas prices increased by almost 50 cents per gallon and consumers have responded by significantly decreasing their demand for gas. Is the news reporter using the word demand the same way an economist would? The answer here is no. Demand did not decrease. There was movement along the demand curve. At a given price, people are still willing to purchase the same quantity of gasoline. So nothing changed about how much people like gasoline or how much they're willing to pay for it. What happened was the price of gasoline went up, so people reduced the quantity demanded. There was no change in demand. For the following questions, consider whether this is movement along the demand curve or a shift of the demand curve. First example, the MSU basketball team has an excellent start to the season, leading to more fans wanting to attend basketball games. Regarding demand for basketball tickets, this is an outward shift of the demand curve, inward shift of the demand curve, movement up along the demand curve, or movement down along the demand curve. The answer here is A. It's an outward shift of the demand curve. Let's see what that looks like. So that's another way, it's an increase in demand. So even if the price of basketball tickets doesn't change, so we hold the price constant, think about it, initially we're right here at our original demand curve, that many tickets. Team does well, more people want to go, we have an increase in quantity demanded, or an increase in demand. Next question. MSU increases the price for student football tickets. As a result, fewer students attend football games. What is this? This is movement up along the demand curve, up and to the left. So what's going on here? Well, this is, again, the kind of thing that just is showing us the law of demand, which is that when price goes up, quantity goes down. So the price of football tickets went up, so people bought fewer of them. Next one. Due to the popularity of streaming services like Netflix and YouTube, there has been a long-term downward trend in the number of cable television subscribers. Regarding the demand for cable television, this is outward, inward, movement up, movement down. The answer here is B, an inward or leftward shift of the demand curve. You can see that this is something that has actually happened. So what happened was, we think about all of the subscribers to cable and satellite television. Initially, they would have been right around here. And then many of them have switched to just watching Netflix or YouTube or something like that. And so even holding price the same, we would expect for there to be fewer subscribers to Dish Network and Comcast. Next. Initially, Kroger is the only grocery store in town. Then Meijer and Whole Foods open stores. As a result of competition, prices decrease. What happens? The answer here is D. We have movement down along the demand curve. So nothing changed about how much people like groceries. The only thing that happened was groceries got cheaper. So price goes down, quantity goes up.